Curtsy lower, said Lady Marchbank, and the drawing-room laughed as though she had said something witty. Theodore, Duke of Lyndhurst, had come to the Havelock Assembly for 1 hour and no more, and he had already given it 40 minutes he did not intend to give again. He was standing at the edge of the great blue room with a glass of untouched claret in his hand when the laughter turned him round, and he saw the girl. She was in the middle of the polished parquet, sunk in a curtsy, and she had been sunk there long enough that the muslin at her knee had begun to tremble. Plain grey wool, a gown mended twice at the elbow and mended honestly, without any attempt to hide the thread. Her head was bowed. Her hands were held out from her sides in the correct posture, and she held it, while the Dowager Countess of Marchbank stood over her with her chin lifted and her fan half open, taking her time. Lower, Lady Marchbank said again, comfortably. You are a companion, Miss Ashcombe, not a guest. A companion curtsies to the floor. Or do you imagine yourself something finer than you are? No, my lady, the girl said. Her voice was steady. That was what struck him first, before anything else about her. It was perfectly steady. She went lower. There was a sound from somewhere near the pianoforte that might have been a titter, and Lady Marchbank's set. 3 young women in white with pearls at their throats, a pair of gentlemen who ought to have known better, took it up and passed it round the room the way one passes a plate of sweets. The girl's knee was very near the boards now. Her shoulders had begun to shake with the strain of holding the weight of her own body in a posture no body was built to hold. Hold it, said Lady Marchbank, until I am satisfied. Theodore set down his glass. He was aware, distantly, that the room noticed. He was accustomed to being noticed. He had been called cold in print and worse in private, and the mothers of London had long since stopped throwing their daughters into his path, which he had counted a mercy. He crossed the parquet without hurry, and the laughter thinned before him the way water thins over a stone, and by the time he had reached the middle of the floor there was no laughter at all. He stopped in front of the girl. She could not see him, bowed as she was. She could see, he supposed, the toes of his boots, and she must have known whose they were, because he saw her breath catch. He put out his hand. Miss Ashcombe, he said. She did not move. Somewhere behind him a fan clicked shut. Your Grace, Lady Marchbank began, in the voice of a woman explaining a small joke to a man too dull to have followed it. We are at play. She is a companion. She is only a... Miss Ashcombe, Theodore said again, and he did not raise his voice at all, and did not turn his head. Take my hand. Her hand came up. It was cold, and there was a callus at the base of the thumb, and it shook once when it touched his, and then it did not shake again. He closed his fingers around it and drew her up. She came up slowly, the way a person comes up who has been held down long enough that the coming up hurts, and he did not let go until she was standing straight, and then he did not let go for a moment after that either. She was young, 24 perhaps. Her face was pale and her eyes were grey, and there was a thin line of colour high on each cheekbone that had nothing to do with pleasure. She looked at him, and she did not thank him, and she did not weep, and she did not simper, and he found that he respected her enormously for all 3. He turned. The Countess of Marchbank was a handsome woman of 60, with a great many diamonds and the particular ugliness that comes of having been permitted, for a very long time, to be cruel in a room where everyone laughs. She was looking at him with the beginnings of an expression he had seen before on the faces of men across a table at cards, when they understand, a half-second late, what has been done to them. Lady Marchbank, he said, you will forgive me. I am not clever, and I find I have missed the amusement. Perhaps you would be good enough to explain it to me. What precisely was the jest, Your Grace? Because as I understand it, he said, the jest was that a young woman who is paid £18 a year to fetch your shawls was obliged to kneel on a floor until her legs failed her, and that a room of Christian people found it diverting. I want to be certain I have it right. I should hate to laugh in the wrong place. Nobody breathed. He could hear the candles in the chandelier, actually hear them, the small hiss of the wax, which told him something about how quiet the room had gone. It is not, said Lady Marchbank, and her voice had gone thin, a thing that requires explanation. She is nobody. Ah, said Theodore. Then let me be plain, since we are dispensing with explanation. He looked round the room unhurried, and he let his eyes rest for a moment on each of the young women in white, and on the two gentlemen, and on Mrs. Havelock, their hostess, who had gone the colour of her own tablecloth. "This lady is Miss Ashcombe. She is a gentleman's daughter, and I am told her father was a curate, which means he did more good before breakfast than this room will do in a 12-month. She is a guest under Mrs. Havelock's roof, and she is under my protection from this moment, and any person in England who finds that amusing may come to Lyndhurst Park and explain the joke to me at their leisure. I am generally at home." He paused. "Lady Marchbank," he said, "you have a great deal of consequence. You will find you have rather less of it tomorrow, and that will not be my doing. It will be arithmetic. Consequence is only what other people agree to pretend, and I have just declined to pretend." The countess opened her mouth. "Do not," he said, quite gently, "would go badly." She shut it. He turned back to Miss Ashcombe. She was standing very straight, and she was white to the lips, and her hand was still in his, and he saw the moment she understood that it was, and he saw her decide not to be ashamed of it. She lifted her chin. "May I take you to a chair?" he said. "Or would you rather leave the room? Either is a choice, neither is a favour." She looked at him for a long moment. "A chair," she said. "If I leave, they will say I ran." Something in his chest turned over quietly, like a key. "Then a chair," he said, and he walked to the length of that room, the whole length slowly, past every one of them, and he put her in a chair by the fire, and he took the seat beside her, and he did not leave it for an hour and a half. She did not talk much at first. He did not press her. He asked her whether she preferred the fire or the window, and she said the fire. And he asked whether she had eaten, and she said she had not been permitted to, that a companion ate afterwards, and he said nothing at all to that, but he beckoned to a footman, and there was, in short order, a plate of cold chicken and a glass of wine on the little table at her elbow, and she looked at it, and then at him with an expression he could not read. "You are making it worse," she said at last, low. "Yes," said Theodore, "I am aware. She will dismiss me tonight. She will." "You knew that when you crossed the floor." "I did." Nell Ashcombe turned her head and looked into the fire. The light of it came up along her cheek, and there was a hollow under the bone that told him she had been hungry longer than tonight. "Then why?" she said. He considered the question honestly, because she had asked it honestly, and she was, he thought, a woman who had been given very few honest answers in her life. "But she was going to keep you there," he said, "until you fell. That was the design, not the curtsy, the falling. And I discovered, standing at the edge of the room, that I would rather burn down every acquaintance I possess than watch it." She did not look at him, but her hand, resting on the arm of the chair, went white at the knuckles. "I have nothing," she said. "You understand that? No portion, no family. A dead father and £11 in the world, and after tonight, no character to show and no place to go. When you are gone home to Lyndhurst Park, that is what will still be true of me." "I am aware of that also," he said. "Then you are a fool, your grace, and I say it with gratitude." He laughed. It surprised him. He heard it, and half the room heard it, and he saw two dowagers turn round in astonishment, because the Duke of Lyndhurst did not laugh in public and had not, to his own knowledge, for 6 years. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, "you may say it as often as you like." Across the room, Lady Marchbank was standing with her back to the pianoforte, surrounded by her set, and she was speaking quickly and quietly, and one on the heads turned towards the fire, towards the plain grey gown in the good chair with a duke beside it. He met each look as it came. He did not smile. He held them until they dropped, one after another, like a man snuffing candles down a row. At 11:30, Lady Marchbank sent a footman to say that Miss Ashcombe was required at the carriage immediately. Nell rose. "Miss Ashcombe," Theodore said. She stopped. "If she turns you off tonight," he said, "you will not sleep on a road. You will go to my aunt, Lady Sophia Wentmore, in Hill Street. She is a difficult, disagreeable, entirely honest old woman, and she will take you in because I ask it, and she will insult you within the hour, and you will find you like her. I cannot accept." "You can," he said. "You need not. That is a different word, and it is yours to say. But you can." She looked at him. The chandelier burned overhead, and somewhere behind her the whole of London society was watching a curate's daughter in mended wool being spoken to as though she were the only person in the room. "Why me?" she said. It was barely a whisper. I have been asking myself that, said Theodore, for the last 2 hours, and I find I do not care for the answer, because the answer is that it does not signify why. It is simply true, and it appears to be permanent, and I am not a man accustomed to being inconvenienced by his own heart. She went white, then red. Then she curtsied to him, a small one, a correct one, the curtsy of an equal to a man she esteemed, and she went out through the door and left the room roaring behind her like a fire taking hold. By noon the following day, all of London knew, and half of it had improved upon the telling. Theodore heard the improvements from his aunt, who sent for him at 11 and received him in her morning room in Hill Street with a face like a closed ledger. "You have ruined yourself," said Lady Sophia Wentmore, in one evening, with a companion, in front of the Marchbank woman who has the tongue of an adder and the memory of the Bank of England. "Good morning, aunt. They are saying you have kept her. They are saying she contrived it, that she arranged to be humiliated in order to be rescued, which is the sort of thing said only by people who have never been humiliated. She rapped her stick once upon the floor. Sit down. She is upstairs. She arrived at 1 in the morning with a box the size of a hat box and everything she owns inside it, and she would not take the good bedchamber, and she has been mending my housemaid's apron since 7 o'clock this morning, because she says she cannot eat bread she has not earned." Theodore said nothing for a moment. "Do you dislike her?" he asked. "I have been trying to," said his aunt with great asperity, "for 10 hours, and I have failed, and I hold you entirely responsible." Lady Marchbank had turned her off at midnight in the courtyard of the Havelock house, in front of the servants, without a character, and had told her, Theodore learned this later, and not from Nell, that she would see to it that no respectable house in England employed her again. It was not an idle threat. The countess was cousin to 3 great families and had, for 40 years, been the woman whose approval decided which governess was taken and which was not. Within a week, 2 positions Nell had written for were withdrawn. Within a fortnight, a small school in Bath which had offered her a place teaching music wrote to say, with apologies, that the situation was no longer vacant. Theodore knew all of it, because he had a steward named Blackwood who was very good at knowing things, and because the letters came to Hill Street, and his aunt did not scruple to tell him what was in them. "She has not once asked me for anything," he said Lady Sophia. "She has not. That is why I like her. It is also why you will have to be a great deal cleverer than you are being." He called in Hill Street every day. He did it openly, in daylight, with his carriage standing in the street where every passing soul could read the arms on the door, and he sat in his aunt's drawing-room, and he talked to Nell Ashcombe for an hour, and then he went away again. She was, he discovered, extraordinary company. She had read a great deal, being the daughter of a poor scholar who had owned nothing but books and had left her all of them. She played the pianoforte better than any woman he had ever heard in a London drawing-room, and she played it badly on purpose when Lady Sophia's guests came, because a companion who played well was resented, and she had learned that at 19 and never unlearned it. "Play it properly," Theodore said one afternoon, when they were alone but for his aunt asleep by the fire with a shawl over her face. "Your Grace, Theodore," he said, "you have been calling me Your Grace for 3 weeks in the tone one uses for a bill one cannot pay." She looked at him. Then she turned back to the instrument, and she played properly, and it was not a drawing-room piece, it was something slow and grave and old, and he sat in his aunt's uncomfortable chair with his hands loose on his knees and did not move, and she had finished. The last chord went out of the room. "My father used to say," Nell said without turning round, "that God did not give a talent to be hidden under a bushel, and then he would tell me to hide it, because we were poor, and a poor girl who is remarkable is only a nuisance. He was wrong. He was frightened for me. Then he was frightened and wrong, and both can be true." Theodore rose. He crossed to the pianoforte and stood beside it, and she looked up, and he found he had nothing whatever prepared to say. "Miss Ashcombe." Nell. Her hands went still on the keys. "I am 38 years old," he said. "I have been hunted through 11 seasons by women who wanted Lyndhurst Park and would have taken me as an unfortunate necessity attached to it. I did not resent them. It is the market, and they did not make it. But I have never once in my life sat in a room and wished to stay in it. I have sat in this room every day for 3 weeks, and I have gone away each time and counted the hours until I might come back, and I am too old to pretend I do not know what that is." She was very white. "You cannot," she said. "I can. It is the one thing in this world I can do. That is rather the whole point of being a duke, and I have found so few uses for it. They will say I trapped you. They will. They will say it of you too, that you were made a fool of by a girl in a mended gown, and they will laugh at you, and they have never laughed at you in your life, and you do not know what it is." "No," he agreed, "but you do. And you sat in that chair by the fire with your chin up, and you did not run, so I imagine I shall manage it with your instruction." Nell Ashcombe put her hands in her lap and looked at them. "I have £11, she said, "and a box, and an enemy who is a countess. You have a curate's daughter's education, a musician's hands, a temper you keep on a chain, and the only steady voice I have ever heard in a room full of cowards," Theodore said. "I will take my chances with the arithmetic." She did not say yes. She said, "Give me until the spring," in a voice that shook for the first time since he had known her, and he bowed, and he did not touch her, though he stood near enough to see the pulse beating in her throat. And he went out into Hill Street and stood on the step for a full minute in the cold before he could remember what he had come out for. The retaliation came in February, and it was worse than he had expected, because Lady Marchbank was cleverer than he had allowed. She did not attack Nell. She attacked her father. It began as a whisper at a card table, and it was in 3 houses by the end of the week. That the late Reverend Ashcombe of Netherby had been dismissed from his curacy for dishonesty. That money had gone missing from the poor box. That the living had been taken from him and he had died in disgrace, and that his daughter had come to London with a false name for herself and a design upon whatever she could get. The story had the terrible completeness of a thing invented by a woman with time and malice and 40 years of practice. It even had a date. Nell read it in a letter from an old friend in the country who wrote to warn her, and Theodore was in the room when she read it, and he watched her face go still in a way he had not seen since the night of the Curtsy. She put the letter down. "It is false," she said. "I know it." "He gave away his own coat," she said. "He gave away his own coat in January to a man who mended fences, and he took a fever from it, and he died of the fever, and she says he stole from the poor box." Her voice did not rise. That was the dreadful part. It did not rise at all. "She may say what she likes of me. I am nobody, and she is right that I am nobody. But he was a good man, and he is dead and cannot answer her." Theodore stood. He said, "He cannot." "What are you going to do?" She looked up, and there was something in her face he had not seen before, fear, but not for herself. "Theodore, she wants you to strike her. If you strike her, she will bleed publicly and gracefully, and half of London will pity her, and the rest will say the Duke of Lyndhurst was so besotted with a fortune hunter that he ran mad in a ballroom. She is not clever, but she is patient, and she has laid it very carefully. Do not give her what she is asking for." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are the most formidable person I have ever met," he said, "and you are wearing a gown you have mended 4 times. 5, said Nell. "Answer me." "I am going to do nothing at all," said Theodore, "in a ballroom. I am going to send Blackwood to Netherby." It took 11 days. Blackwood came back with a bundle tied in string, the parish register, copied and attested by the present rector, the churchwarden's accounts for 4 years. Every column in the late curate's own hand, and every one of them balanced to the farthing. A letter from the bishop's secretary confirming that the Reverend Ashcombe had held his curacy in good standing to the day of his death, and had been offered a better living the previous Michaelmas, and had declined it, on the grounds that Netherby had no one else, and 8 letters. 8 from 8 people in that parish who could barely write, saying what the man had been, a woman whose husband he had buried without a fee, a labourer he had taught to read, a widow he had fed for a winter out of his own £11 a quarter. Theodore read them at his desk at 2 in the morning with the candles guttering, and when he had finished the last one he sat for some time with his hand over his eyes. Then he wrote 3 letters of his own, and sent for his aunt, and began, carefully, quietly, without a single raised voice anywhere in London, to build the thing that would end Lady Marchbank. He did not tell Nell what it was. He told her only this, standing in Hill Street with his hat in his hand, on a grey afternoon at the beginning of March. There is an assembly at the Havelock House on the 14th, the same room. Mrs. Havelock has been persuaded, she required a great deal of persuading, and my aunt was not gentle, to send you a card in your own name. You will not go as anybody's companion, you will go as a guest. Nell's hands had gone quite still. They will not receive me, she said. Some will not. She will be there. She will, said Theodore. She has been particularly invited. Nell looked at him, and then, slowly, she began to understand, and he watched her understand it, and he saw her draw breath the way a person draws breath at the top of a very high place. You want me to walk back into that room, she said. No, said Theodore. I want you to walk into it if you wish to, and never come near it again if you do not, and I will love you exactly the same either way and take you to Lyndhurst Park tomorrow and let London rot. It is not a test, Nell. It is a door. I am only telling you that it is open, and that I will be standing on the other side of it. She was silent for a long time. What shall I wear? She said at last. I have grey wool. Then wear grey wool, he said, and let them look at it, and something came up in her face then, fierce and bright and entirely new, and he thought, there she is. She wore the grey wool. Theodore stood at the foot of the Havelock staircase on the evening of the 14th and watched her come down it, and the whole blue drawing-room below turned, one head after another, the way a field turns in wind. She had mended the gown a 6th time. She had put no jewel on her throat and no flower in her hair, and she had dressed it plainly, and she came down that staircase into a room that had laughed at her on her knees, and she came down it like a queen who has been away. He met her at the bottom. He offered his arm. She took it. Courage, he said under the noise. I have none whatever, said Nell pleasantly. Walk slowly so it does not show. Lady Marchbank was by the pianoforte in diamonds, with her set about her, the 3 young women in white, the 2 gentlemen, and a dozen more who had come to watch the sport. Mrs. Havelock hovered at the edge of them with the expression of a woman who has invited a storm into her house, and now cannot recall why. The chandelier blazed. It was in every particular the same room. Theodore walked Nell into the middle of it and stopped. Good evening, he said to all of them. The Countess of Marchbank smiled. It was a very good smile. She had had 60 years to practice it. Your Grace, and Miss Ashcombe. How brave of her to come in that gown, after everything one has heard about her poor father. She said it in the carrying voice she kept for such occasions, and she looked round for her laughter, and she got some of it, thin and uncertain, though I suppose when one has nothing to lose. Lady Marchbank, said Theodore, before you continue I have brought some papers with me, and I think you had better see them, because I intend to speak of them presently and I should not like to be taken by surprise. I am told you find surprises trying. He put out his hand. Blackwood came forward and gave him the bundle. Theodore did not raise his voice. He never once that whole evening raised his voice. This, he said, is the churchwarden's account book of the parish of Netherby, for the 4 years preceding the death of the Reverend John Ashcombe. Attested by the present rector, every farthing accounted for in his own hand, and a surplus of £6, which he had put by for the roof. This is a letter from the secretary to the bishop, confirming that he held his curacy in good standing to the day of his death, and had been offered the living of Coldest the previous Michaelmas, at 4 times the stipend, and had refused it. He gave his reason. I will read it to you. He wrote, there is no one else here. The room had gone entirely silent. And these, said Theodore, are 8 letters from the poor of that parish, written in 8 bad hands, and some of them signed with a cross, saying what manner of man it was who is said, in this room and in a dozen others, to have robbed a poor box. He looked up. Lady Marchbank. You told the story at Mrs. Fanshaw's card table on the 9th of February. You told it again at Lady Corvin's on the 11th, and to Mrs. Havelock in this house on the 19th. I have the dates. I have taken some trouble over the dates. That is a monstrous. The Countess began. He was dead, said Theodore, and he could not answer you, and you knew it, and that is why you chose him. You did not attack a duke, because a duke can answer. You did not attack a living man, because a living man can answer. You went into a country churchyard and you dug up a curate who gave away his coat in January and died of it, and you made a joke of him at a card table, 'cause you wanted to hurt a girl in a grey gown who had never in her life done you the slightest injury. He let that stand in the air. Madam, he said, I have known bad men. I have never before met anyone I thought contemptible. Someone in the crowd made a small sound. You may sue me, Theodore said, for saying it. I should be very glad. I have the account books and the bishop's letter and 8 witnesses, and you have a grudge against a companion who would not kneel low enough to amuse you. Let us go to law by all means, and let us do it publicly, and let the whole of England read what you did in the newspapers. I will pay for the whole proceeding myself and count it cheap. Lady Marchbank did not sue him. She stood in the middle of that room in her diamonds, and she looked round it for the faces that had always been there, and Theodore watched them go. Lady Corvin turned away and became absorbed in the chandelier. Mrs. Fanshawe discovered an urgent need to speak to somebody at the far end of the room. The 3 young women in white drew back from her, 1, 2, as though from something in the road. The 2 gentlemen were already gone. It took perhaps 90 seconds. It was the most complete thing he had ever seen. You will regret this, the countess said. Her voice had cracked at last. No, said Theodore. I do not think I shall. She went out. Nobody opened the door for her. She had to do it herself, and she was not accustomed to it, and it took her a moment to manage the handle, and that, not the rest of it, was the part Theodore remembered afterwards. He turned. Nell was standing exactly where he had left her, in the middle of the floor, in her mended grey wool, with the light of the chandelier candles coming down on her bare throat. She was not triumphant. She was looking at him as she had never seen him before. He went to her, and he did not care in the least who watched. Miss Ashcombe, he said. And then, in front of the whole assembled room, in front of Mrs. Havelock and Lady Corvin, every soul who had laughed on the night of the Curtsy, Theodore, 9th Duke of Lyndhurst, went down on one knee upon the polished parquet of the Havelock drawing-room and took her hand and looked up. There was a sound from the room like a wave drawing back. Nell Ashcombe, he said, I have knelt lower than you were ever made to kneel, and I have done it willingly, and I will do it again in any room in England that requires the demonstration. Will you marry me? Her hand shook in his. You are on the floor, she said unsteadily. The Duke of Lyndhurst is on the floor. Yes, said Theodore. It is a very good floor. I have been thinking of nothing else for months. Nell, answer me or I shall stay here until morning, and you will be blamed for it. And Nell Ashcombe began, helplessly, to laugh, and the laugh broke in the middle and became something else, and she said, Yes, yes, of course, yes, you impossible man, get up. He did not get up at once. He turned her hand over and pressed his mouth to the palm of it, to the callus at the base of the thumb that he had felt on the first night, when it was cold and shaking in his and would not shake again. Then he rose and he drew her in, and the room broke into a noise he did not trouble to identify, because she had put her forehead against his shoulder, and the whole of his attention was elsewhere. They were married in June at Lyndhurst, from the parish church, with the doors standing open to the summer. Lady Sophia Wentmore wept throughout and denied it afterwards with great violence. Blackwood, who had ridden to Netherby in the rain, stood at the back with his hat in his hands. And 8 people from a poor parish, who could barely write, came in a hired coach that a duke had paid for, and sat in the second pew, and one of them, the widow who had been fed through a winter out of £11 a quarter, gave the bride a handkerchief she had worked herself. And Nell carried it, and carried nothing else. She wore silk because he asked it. But she kept the grey wool. It hung ever afterwards in a press at Lyndhurst Park, and once a year he found her looking at it, and he never once asked her why, and she never once had to tell him. Lady Marchbank did not come to town again. The invitations, one by one, ceased to arrive. The great families discovered they were connections too distant to signify, and she went down at last to a house in the country where there was nobody to laugh when she said something cruel, which Theodore thought, on the whole, punishment enough. He was told she wrote once, in the second winter, asking to be received. He did not answer it. He did not show it to Nell, either, and that was the only thing he ever kept from her, and he was not sorry. The 3 young women in white married, and were presented, and in due course came to Lyndhurst Park at the great midsummer assembly, because everyone came to Lyndhurst Park, The Duchess of Lyndhurst kept the finest house in the county and the best music in England, and to be left off her list was to be nobody at all. Theodore stood at the head of his own staircase and watched them come. He watched them approach his wife, one after another, in their silks. He watched Lady Corvin, who had turned away to look at a chandelier. He watched Mrs. Fanshawe, at whose card table it had begun. And he watched each of them stop before Nell, and sink, deeply, correctly, all the way down and hold it in the way that is owed to a duchess, until she chose to give them her hand and raise them up. She raised them all, every one. She never once let a woman wait, and she never once let it be sport, and she was gentler with them than any of them deserved, and Theodore, watching from the stair with his glass untouched in his hand, thought that he had never in his life loved anything the way he loved her for that. Later, when the last carriage had gone, he found her in the long gallery with the tapers burning low in their sconces, standing at the window with her shoes in her hand. "Your feet," he said. "They ache," said the Duchess of Lyndhurst. Everyone curtsied. It went on for an hour. He came and stood behind her, and put his arms about her, and rested his chin upon her hair. "Did you enjoy it?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the dark park, the long grass, the lights of the last carriage going away down the avenue. "No," she said. "I kept wanting to tell them to stand up." She turned in his arms and looked up at him, and her face in the taper's light was the face he had seen bowed to a drawing-room floor in a mended gown, and would have known anywhere on earth. "That is what you did. You did not make them kneel to me. You only made me stand." "Yes," said Theodore. "Then I have had enough of curtsies," said Nell, "for one lifetime." And he took her hand, the left one with his signet on it that had shaken once and never again, and he kissed it, and he said, "Then no one shall ever curtsy to you again, madam, except me." And she laughed at him, and the candles burned down in the sconces, and the great house went quiet around them.